3, motion relating to start-ups.
Call the honourable member for Banks.
Well, thank you, Deputy Speaker. I move the motion relating to start-ups in the terms at which it appears on the notice paper. We need to build a start-up society. Good start-ups change economies and the world. They solve problems that the rest of us haven't even thought about yet. They create high-wage jobs. Start-ups make us more entrepreneurial, more global, more interesting. We need more of them. I spent the 14 years before I entered Parliament in and around start-ups. I've seen the Australian start-up scene evolve during that time and strongly believe that its future and that of our broader economy are closely linked. And Australia, with a world-leading start-up economy, is likely to be a world leader in its overall economy. That must be our aim. The great disruptive innovations usually come from start-ups. Of course, big companies can innovate, but economic history shows us that major change is usually brought about by challengers, not incumbents. The boldest, most radical, most profound economic changes are rarely brought about by incumbents. They are brought about by outsiders who have nothing to lose. There are several reasons why start-ups, not big incumbents, tend to make the breakthroughs that create new industries. Incumbents, by definition, are already successful. They have real-world profits to protect today. Those real-world profits will generally get more attention at board meetings than the potential projects of the distant future. Usually, the impact of disruptive change is negative for incumbents, even if they succeed in embracing it. The disrupted world of tomorrow usually looks worse for incumbents than the more certain world of today. So it can be hard to marshal enthusiasm for a process that is likely to lead to a worse overall outcome. When cars were introduced, the winners were start-ups, not horse and buggy manufacturers. Candle makers didn't create the electricity industry. Railroad companies didn't create the aviation industry. There are examples in more recent years that demonstrate this same point. Around the world, Yellow Pages businesses had far more relevant assets for internet search than anyone else did. They possessed huge databases of commercial and household information, and logically should have been better placed than anyone to lead in the new world of providing information online. But fresh-faced innovators completely outdid them, and now the Yellow Pages business model barely exists. In retail, incumbents had incredible advantages: brands, stores, warehouses, distribution systems and millions of customers. And yet the most valuable retailer in the world, Amazon, is an internet startup that didn't exist until the mid-90s. Amazon is now worth more than $300 billion US, more than $100 billion more valuable than its closest competitor, the giant traditional retailer Walmart. Now, of course, big companies can innovate, and the research and development that takes place in them is not to be underestimated. But revolutions are rarely initiated by royalty. And revolutions matter because not all kinds of economic activity are equal. When new industries are created, the value that they generate cascades down through the generations. Companies that create new industries are generally far more valuable than companies that simply participate in long-existing ones. The value that these start-ups generate means wealth that can be invested into further development and lots of jobs. When start-ups create new industries, they tend to bring with them follow-on opportunities. Think of the enormous industry that has sprung up around Google, servicing the needs of its advertisers and people who want to appear in its search results. Successful start-ups create new industries and the supporting infrastructure that needs to go with them. Now, start-ups have always been essential to economic success, but they're more essential now than ever before. The economy is always changing. A century ago, 1 in 3 working Australians worked in agriculture. Now it's about 1 in 40. So change is nothing new. What is new, though, is the pace of change. The internet means that everything in the global economy happens at a much faster pace than ever before. Now, that's a challenge, but it's a huge opportunity as well. The biggest issue we face is the need to change our culture towards one which better embraces risk. If you were to describe Australia's business culture in one word, that word would probably be pragmatic. Now, there's nothing wrong with pragmatism, but pragmatic is not the first word you would generally associate with great entrepreneurs. I think that our pragmatic business culture has a few sources, some of them linked to our broader national personality, and some of them a practical response to to the historic realities of the Australian market. As a nation, we don't take ourselves too seriously, and we're not given to grand boasts or outlandish pronouncements. And that's a good thing. But sometimes startups need to embrace radical or seemingly over-the-top goals in order to crash through the existing orthodoxy. So we need to develop a culture where it is okay to say we are going to be the best software company in the world, because if you can't say it out loud, you're unlikely to pursue it as a goal. Our reluctance to fully embrace a startup culture also has some solid grounding in the traditional realities of the Australian market. We have a small population and we're isolated. Our small population has tended to lead to industry structures with 2 or 3 big players and limited room for challenges. As a result, our business culture is overweight the establishment. But that's starting to change as technology lowers the cost of entry for new businesses and small overseas players enter our market. The old certainties about a few big businesses dominating each industry will gradually fade away. Because we are geographically isolated with tough time zones for the US and Europe, Australia has historically not been the most logical place on the planet from which to launch a global business effort. But that's changing too. Barriers to trade are thankfully breaking down, communications are instantaneous, and consumers are looking for the best product no matter where it comes from. So the geographical constraints of Australia are less significant than in the past. All this means we have immense opportunities. We're a highly educated, prosperous, democratic nation with attributes that the world admires. The world is ready for us. We need to be ready for it. So what's the role of government? Let's not pretend that government will come up with winning commercial ideas. It won't, and it shouldn't. Those ideas will come from the restless energy of a new generation of entrepreneurs. But in order for those entrepreneurs to turn their ideas into reality, they need strong underlying foundations in the surrounding economy. That's where government comes in. For me, a critical area that must be addressed is access to capital. Across the entire period that I was involved with startups, the relatively weak domestic environment for raising capital was a constant issue. At times, the environment improves for a while, but generally, capital for early-stage ideas is hard to come by. I think there's a role for government in encouraging investments in startups through the tax system. I believe that all investments in startup companies should be free of capital gains tax on exit. While there would be a cost to this approach, the PBO estimated at $50 million over the forward estimates period, which is about 1/34,000th of estimated government revenue in that time. That change would mean that an entrepreneur who is trying to raise those critical early funds can say to a prospective investor, "This may or may not work, but if it works, there is no capital gains tax." This will be a powerful incentive and help to encourage some investors to shift assets from classes such as investment property into startups. And this tax exemption should be available to all investors in startups. Last week, the Assistant Treasurer announced reforms which will enable crowdfunding to become a reality in Australia. This will enable entrepreneurs to access a whole new class of potential investors, and I believe that those crowdfunders' investments in startups should be free of capital gains tax. Another area we must further develop is technical skills. We need to become a nation not just of technology consumers but of technology creators. We're great at embracing the latest devices, but less great at inventing them. We want our brightest kids thinking about software, engineering and IT more generally. It's noteworthy that although there has been a strong demand for these skills in the workplace for some years, the local education system has not produced enough sufficiently skilled employees to meet all these needs. This suggests there's been some market failure in this area, and government should take a long view in implementing policies to encourage a greater take-up of these courses. Directors' duties matter a lot too. Australia's laws are onerous on directors, and generally that's a good thing. We want directors to safeguard the assets of investors and ensure that businesses don't trade while insolvent. But there is an argument that Australia's laws are too strict, with the consequence that directors can be unwilling to support management in pursuing risky goals. It is worth reviewing this area to see if we can better encourage risk-taking in smaller companies while continuing to maintain strong safeguards against insolvent trading. As a nation, we need to build a culture that celebrates the radical idea, the big concept, the heroic failure. We should embrace policies that push our economy more down the startup path. We all know that the jobs of tomorrow will come from industries not yet created, And we know that those new industries are likely to be created by startups somewhere in the world. Our goal should be for those industries to be created right here with our expertise exported to the world. The opportunities are immense. We should seize them.